Good day, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on Chapter 8, the Human Resources Management and Payroll Cycle, one of the transaction cycles under accounting information system. In this subject, we will describe the major business activities, the key decisions, and the information needs in the HRM or payroll cycle, the general threats to those activities, and the controls that can mitigate those threats. We will also explain the payroll cycle activities, the key decisions and information needs, and the threats to those activities and controls that can mitigate those threats. Now, human resources management and payroll cycle may not be an alien term for many of you. You might have already heard HRM in your in pop culture. Well, it is related to handling employees, especially in TV series or movies involving workplace comedies, or say set in an office or in a law firm. And then payroll cycle, payroll, as it entails now the payment of salaries or compensation. The payroll system, which is under the accounting department control, typically produces now the employee paychecks and maintains the related records as required by government regulations. The payroll system is usually um, processed by batch because employees are paid bi-weekly and together, meaning you have the same cutoff and you have the same payday with the rest of the staff. The human resources management system, on the other hand, maintains files on employees' job history, skills, and benefits, and are updated weekly or monthly, or it could be whatever the company prefers. Each system maintains its own separate files and sometimes storing the same data, such as pay rates, in different formats. So basically, the HRM and the payroll cycle are related with each other. What is being computed in payroll is based now on the equivalent rate, hourly rate, or monthly rate of a particular individual hired for a specific position. And this rate changes as that individual matures, gets more expertise or experience, and the length of service in the company. So the changes now in the human resources management file pertaining to the rate affects, or what should I say, determines now the total amount to be computed under the payroll cycle. Now, the human resources management or payroll cycle class is a recurring set of business activities and related data processing operations associated with effectively managing the employee workforce. The more important tasks include recruiting and hiring new employees, training, job assignment, compensation or payroll, performance evaluation, and discharge of employees due to voluntary or involuntary termination. Task 1, which is recruiting and hiring new employees, and Task 6, which is discharge of employees due to voluntary or involuntary termination, are performed only once for each employee. The entirety of the employee stay, these two tasks are performed only once. Whereas task 2 to 5, from training, job assignment, compensation, and performance evaluation, are performed repeatedly for as long as an employee works for the company. In most companies, class, these 6 activities are split between 2 separate systems. Task Force Task 4, which is compensating employees, is the payroll system's primary function. The HRM system performs the other 5 tasks, which is task 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. In many companies, these 2 systems are organizationally separate. The HRM system is usually the responsibility of the Director of Human Resources, whereas the controller manages the payroll system. However, most diagram of enterprise resource planning systems integrate the 2 set of activities. In our lesson in this chapter class, we will focus primarily on the payroll system because accountants have traditionally been responsible for this function. We will start by describing the integrated HRM payroll system and then discuss the controls necessary to ensure that it provides management with reliable information and complies with government regulations. Now, as an overview class, the important task, okay, the task 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 are all under the HRM director, while compensation or payroll falls under the controller, which is the payroll function. Note, class, that organizational success depends on skilled and motivated employees because their knowledge and skills affect the quality of the goods and services provided to customers. In a professional service organizations and accounting and law firms, employees' knowledge and skills are the principal component of the company's product, and labor costs represent the major expense incurred in generating revenues. On the other hand, in manufacturing concerned firms, um, the labor cost is not the primary expenditure because it's only one of the three primary components of the expenditure, which would comprise of direct materials and overhead. However, employees that are directly related to the manufacturing of products are key cost driver. It's because the quality of their work affects the overall productivity of the manufacturing plant and reduce the product defect rates. Thus, it is not surprising to find that stock analysts believe that employees' skills and knowledge may be worth several times the value of a company's tangible assets, such as its inventory, property, and equipment. To effectively utilize, class, the employee's HRM or payroll system, the HRM department or the payroll department must collect and store information uh, needed to answer the following kinds of questions. The first question is, how many employees does the organization need to accomplish its strategic plans? And the second question, which employees possess specific skills? Other type of questions that they may ask would be, which skills are in short supply, which skills are in oversupply, how effective are the current training programs in maintaining and improving the employee skills levels, and the overall performance improving or declining. Now, if you look into the diagram, class, which is a portion of an ERP system that supports human resources management and payroll, you'll see there that the human resources department will provide now or will handle the hiring, firing, and promotion of staff. And this hiring, firing, and promotion activity of the human resources department would result now to the creation of master data, which will contain now all the important information of the employees and staff, including their educational background, their monthly rates, their hourly rates, their their trainings, their skills, their evaluation based on key performance indicators, or whether they're up for promotion or are they already promoted and now entitled to higher rates. The various departments provide for the time card, which will contain now the hours worked and the attendance now of the particular staff or employee. The factory workstations will include job time tickets, and these will comprise now the time and attendance data that will then be reconciled by the payroll department. The payroll department, after getting now the time and attendance data, will now proceed to the preparation of the payroll, and this will go through the database, and the payroll disbursements will be the output. The disbursement now will include now the approval from the Treasury Department and the preparation now of the check, in this case, check, but in practice, it could be the preparation of the authority to debit letter that will be sent to the bank where the company maintains its payroll account. That authority to debit will contain the total amount to be debited from this bank account and the equivalent amount to the respective bank accounts of the staff that will be credited. Right? So there is no release of cash, or the cash didn't go out, but rather the bank facilitates this transfer of cash or amount from the corporate payroll account to the individual bank accounts of the employees. That's why, if you will notice later on when you are hired in a particular company, the company requires you to open a bank account in their own bank, same bank. Like, say, if the corporation or the company maintains a payroll account in BPI, they will ask you to open a bank account in BPI. But of course, they will provide you a certification in order for you to be able to open a payroll account in BPI easier than the normal. Kasi merong certification coming from your potential employer. Right. Let's proceed to the threats and controls in a payroll cycle. The first will be the general issues throughout the entire HRM and payroll cycle. The first threat will be the inaccurate or invalid master data. Okay? The inaccurate employee master data could result in over or under staffing. It can also create inefficiencies due to assigning employees to perform tasks for which they are not fully qualified. Also, inaccurate payroll master data results in errors in paying employees that can create significant moral issues. In addition, the organization may incur fines for errors made in paying payroll taxes. Errors in data about use of employees' time can result in inaccurate performance evaluations and mistakes in the computation or calculation of the cost of the organization's product and services. That's why it is imperative that we address this particular threat. There are three controls that are suggested to mitigate this particular threat. First is to um, institute or um, introduce in your accounting information system data processing integrity controls. Also, to restrict the access to master data and to review all changes of master data, meaning a higher up will be given the authority to review any changes that will be suggested or that will be introduced by an officer or employee before him. So therefore, you create a chain of accountability between two sets of staff or employees. It is also important to restrict access to data and configure the system so that only authorized employees can make changes to master data. This requires changing default configurations. Example, consider the situation where a payroll clerk types in the name of an employee who is not currently in the database. The default configurations integrated would usually respond by asking whether the clerk wants to create new employees record. This particular function violates now the segregation of duties by permitting a person who does the recording of the payroll to also authorize the creation of new accounts. And it is essential in internal controls that when there are incompatible duties, they have to be segregated and to be done by two separate individuals, not by single person, because it will allow not that single person to perpetuate fraud and theft within the company without the ability of being detected, because they can retrace their tracks by simply correcting what they have done through the update of your master data. Another threat class would be unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. This unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, such as salary and performance evaluations for individual employees, can create moral problems. If employees learn that their pay differs significantly from their co-workers, and worse, that gap on pay is that they perform the same duties and responsibilities. In addition, an authorized disclosure of performance evaluations or reasons for firing an employee may subject the organization to lawsuits. The best control procedure for reducing the risk of unauthorized disclosure of payroll data is using multi-factor authentication and physical security controls to restrict access to your master data or to only those employees who need such access to perform their jobs. For example, when someone is capable of searching the database about average salary averages, It should not be allowed in a quantity that is so large that a particular person can generate now so much so of this data from the company, and that such leak will lead now to a decline in your employees' morale. Another threat will be hiring unqualified or larcenous um, staff, loss or destruction of data. And this can be addressed through backup and disaster recovery procedures. You create now a backup that will be located in a separate location, that should there be a storm or a disaster within the vicinity of the company's operations or headquarters, the database, the backup of the database will be safely stored somewhere else. Another threat will be hiring unqualified or larcenous employees. Hiring unqualified employees can create production expenses, and hiring larcenous employee can result in the theft of assets. Both problems are best dealt with by appropriate hiring procedures, and skill qualifications for each open position should be stated explicitly in the position control report. Candidates should be asked to sign a statement on the job application form that confirms the accuracy of the information being submitted and provides their consent to a thorough background check of their credentials and employment history. Independent verification of an applicant's credentials is important because resumes often contain false or embellished information. The fifth threat will be violations of employment laws. The threat in the HRM payroll cycle, that is the violation of applicable laws and regulations concerning the proper hiring and dismissal of employees. The government, specifically the Department of Labor and Employment, in pursuance to the um, um, social justice provisions of our labor code, imposes stiff penalties on firms and companies that violate provisions of our employment law, especially the due process requirement in firing people. In addition, organizations can also be subject to civil suits by alleged victims of employment discrimination. To control or to mitigate this particular problem is to carefully document all actions relating to advertising for, recruiting, and hiring new employees, and to the dismissal of your employees. Under the labor code, employees can only be dismissed under um, ju- um, just and authorized causes. And these just and authorized causes are enumerated under the labor code, and all grounds for termination should fall within these predefined listing of causes. Now, this particular documentation that you will provide will demonstrate now compliance with the applicable government regulations, and continued training or education of your staff with respect to the changes in employment laws is also important. Now, the second activity will be the update of the payroll master data. Okay, the update of the payroll master data um, is the responsibility of the HRM department, that is internally initiated changes related to employment, whereas the payroll department updates information about the tax rates, about the payroll deductions, when it receives notification of changes from various government units and insurance companies, or even the SSS, the PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig. Although payroll is processed in batch mode, the HRM department has online access to update the payroll master database so that all payroll changes are entered in a timely manner and are properly reflected in the next pay period. So what are the threats now under the payroll master database update? First is the unauthorized changes to payroll master as shown in item number 6. This can result in increased expenses from unjustified payments to employees. And the mitigating control here would be the proper segregation of duties, um, that it must be the HRM department that should be able to update the payroll master file for hirings, firings, pay raises, and promotions. HRM departments employees in turn um should not directly participate in payroll processing or paycheck distribution. This segregation of duties prevents now someone with access to paychecks from creating fictitious employees or altering pay rates and then intercepting those fraudulent checks. Okay? Now, control access to the payroll system is also important. The system should be configured, as mentioned in 6.2, to compare the user IDs and the passwords with an access control matrix to define now what actions each employee is allowed to perform and confirm what files each employee is allowed to access. Another threat is inaccurate updating of payroll master data. This can result in errors in paying employees and fines for not remitting proper amounts of payroll taxes to the government. So how do we mitigate this one? First is there should be appropriate processing integrity controls, such as validity checks on employee number and the conduct of reasonableness tests for the changes being made, and that should be applied to all payroll change transactions. In addition, having department managers review all the reports of all the changes to employees in their department provides a timely way or a timely manner to detect the error. Okay? Now let's proceed to the not to the next activity, which is to validate time and attendance. The employees' time and attendance um, are being collected. The manner that it's being collected differs depending on the employee's pay status. The employees that are paid on an hourly basis, they are to be that the work that they've done are to be collected using a time card, which is to record now the employee's daily arrival and departure times. If the employee earns a fixed salary, if you're a manager or a professional staff, they the record of their efforts are not usually contained in a time card. Instead, the supervisors informally monitor their presence on the job because fixed salary individuals are not paid for their time. They're not paid hourly, but for output or for a fixed amount on a particular month. Manufacturing companies use job time tickets to record detailed data about how employees use their time. The job time ticket data are used to allocate labor costs amongst various departments, cost centers, and production jobs. Professionals, on the other hand, in service organizations such as accounting, law, and consultancy firms, they similarly track the time they spend performing various tasks and for which clients recording the data on time sheets. So we call that time sheets. The time sheet will have a description of what you have done, what you've covered, what are the tasks that you have particularly completed on a particular day. Other employers use the time sheets to assign costs and accurately bill clients for services provided. So these timesheets are also very important for accurate billings later on. A time card is a document that records the employee's arrival and departure times for each work shift. That time card class is used for hourly rate employees or hourly rate staff. Timesheet, on the other hand, is a data entry screen or a paper document used by salaried professionals to record how much time was spent performing various tasks for specific clients. All right. Now, the staff that are um, often paid either on a straight or commission or on a salary plus commission basis, this requires the staff now to carefully record the amount of their sales. In addition, some sales staff are paid bonuses for exceeding targets. An increasing number of companies in the US are now extending incentive bonuses to employees other than sales staff to motivate their other employees to improve their productivity and work quality. Prior, it's usual for only the sales personnel because they bring revenue to the company that enjoy these incentives and bonuses. But now these incentives and bonuses are been extended even to non-sales staff. Using incentives, commissions, and bonuses require linking the payroll system to the sales and other cycles to collect data and calculate bonuses. Right? Well, Now, so what are the threats now for this inaccurate time and attendance data collection? The main threat to this payroll activity is inaccurate time and attendance data. Um, Inaccuracies in time and attendance records can result in increased labor expenses and erroneous labor expense reports. Source data automation can reduce the risk of unintentional errors in collecting time and attendance data. Um, Information technology can also reduce the risk of intentional inaccuracies in time and attendance data by using biometric authentication techniques such as hand scans to verify the identity of the employee who is clocking in and out of work. The objective is to prevent an employee from leaving work early but having a friend falsely record that person as being at work. Segregation of duties is also important because time card data used for calculating payroll should be reconciled with the job time ticket data used for costing and managerial purposes by someone who is not involved in generating that data. The total time spent on all tasks as recorded in the job time tickets should not exceed the attendance time indicated on the employee's time card. Conversely, all time spent at work should be accounted for on the job time tickets. In addition, requiring departmental supervisors to review and approve time cards and job time tickets um, provides now a detective control on the accuracy of time and attendance data. Supervisory review is particularly important for employees who telecommute, and analysis of system logs can provide assurance that telecommuters are truly working the amount of time for which they are getting paid and that they are not operating a personal business on the side using company provided assets. Now, let's proceed to the preparation of payroll. So the process now involves the payroll transaction being edited, and validate transactions are then sorted by employee number. If the organization is processing payrolls from several divisions, each of these payroll transactions must also be merged, right? Now, for hourly employees, the number of hours worked is multiplied by the wage rate, and then the applicable premiums for overtime or bonuses are added. For salaried employees, on the other hand, yung hindi hourly rate class, the gross pay is a fraction of the annual salary, where the fraction reflects the length of pay period. For example, salaried employees paid monthly would receive 1/12 of their annual salary each pay period. Any applicable commissions, bonuses, and other incentives are also included in the computation or calculation of the gross pay. All payroll deductions are summed, and the total is subtracted from the gross pay to obtain the net pay. Payroll deductions fall into broad categories. These two categories, one would be withholding taxes, and second will be voluntary deductions, which are not really voluntary in the Philippines, but rather mandatory. The deductions for remittance to PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, and SSS for private individuals. Okay? Now, what is the threat of this payroll processing? It's obviously the errors in processing payroll. Errors obviously can hurt employee morale, particularly if paychecks are late. In addition to incorrect payroll expense records and reports, processing errors can lead to penalties if the errors result in failure um, to remit the proper amount of taxes to the BIR. Similarly, failure to accurately implement garnishment on employees' wages and remit those funds to the appropriate party can also lead to financial penalties. Now, there are three types of data processing for payroll errors. One will be the batch totals, where the HRM or payroll systems will continue to use batch processing for payroll because they are paid bi-monthly, and batch totals will be calculated at the time of data entry and then checked against comparable totals. Another um, uh, data processing integrity control will be cross-putting the payroll register, while the total of the net pay column should equal the total of gross pay less the total deductions. And then the payroll clearing account, which is a general ledger account that is used in a two-step process to check the accuracy and completeness of recording payroll costs and their subsequent allocation to appropriate cost centers. First, the payroll clearing account is debited to the amount of gross pay. Cash is credited for the amount of net pay, and the various withholdings are credited to separate liability accounts. The cost accounting process distributes the labor cost to various expense categories and then credits the payroll clearing account for the sum of these allocations. The amount credited to the payroll clearing account should equal the amount that was previously debited when the net pay and various withholdings were recorded. This internal check is an example of a zero balance check because the payroll clearing account should equal zero once both entries have been posted. So if you look into the controls to mitigate the errors in processing payroll, one will be data processing integrity controls. Second will be the supervisory review of payroll register and other reports. Third will be issuing earning statements to employees. And fourth is the review of the IRS guidelines, in our case, BIR guidelines, to ensure proper classification of workers as either employees or independent contractors, right? Now let's proceed to the disbursement of payroll. This is the actual disbursement of paychecks to employees. After paychecks have been prepared, accounts payable reviews and approves the payroll register. A disbursement voucher is then prepared to authorize the transfer of funds from the company's general checking account to its payroll bank account. The disbursement voucher is then used to update the general ledger. Now, what are the threats now in this disbursement of payroll? Is the theft or fraudulent distribution of paychecks. This can result in increased expenses and loss of cash. Applying to payroll the controls related to other cash disbursements can mitigate this threat. Um, what are these controls? One is to restrict the physical access to bank payroll checks and check signature machine. Similarly, ability to authorize fund transfers, electronic fund transfer transactions should be restricted and controlled through the use of strong multi-factor authentication. All payroll checks should be sequentially pre-numbered and periodically accounted for. If payroll is made via direct deposit, all electronic fund transfers transactions should be reviewed. The cashier should sign all payroll checks only when supported by proper documentation. Now, there other controls will be to use of a separate checking account for payroll maintained as an impressed fund, segregation of duties, which is very common as we've discussed in the prior slide decks, restriction of access to payroll data master database, verification of identity of all employees receiving paychecks, and redepositing and claims paychecks and investigating causes, right? Now, the another activity will be the disbursement of payroll taxes and miscellaneous deductions. The process here is that employers must also remit their employer contribution to these state-mandated benefits like the SSS, Pag-ibig, and PhilHealth. The employer must also withhold taxes to employees that are no longer exempt from the 250,000 tax threshold set by the tax code. Um, how do we mitigate these particular threats of failure to make the required payments, the untimely payments, and inaccurate payments? One is to configure the system to make required payments using current instructions from the IRS, in our case, the BIR, processing integrity controls, supervisory review of reports, and employee review of earnings statement. Okay? Now let's proceed to the payroll activities. Okay, so the payroll activities as shown in our diagram, okay, our context diagram shows you that there are five major sources of inputs to the payroll system. The Human Resources Department provides information about hirings, terminations, and pay rate changes due to raises and promotions. employees initiate changes in their discretionary deductions, the various departments provide data after about actual hours employees work. Government agencies provide tax rates and instructions for meeting regulatory requirements. And then similarly, insurance companies and other organizations provide instructions for calculating and remitting various withholdings. The diagram shows that checks, which may be electronic or fund transfer, are the payroll system's principal output. Employees receive individual paychecks and compensation for their services. A payroll check is sent to the bank to transfer funds from the company's regular accounts to its payroll account. Checks are also issued to government agencies, insurance companies, and other organizations to meet company obligations. In addition, the payroll system produces a variety of reports. Um, it shows you the basic activities performed in the payroll cycle. For each activity, the information needed to perform and manage the activity is collected, processed, and stored, right? So the figure above represents a context diagram of the payroll system. It shows you the 5 major inputs. The output will be the payroll check. The HR department provides information about hirings, terminations, and pay rate changes due to raises and promotions, right? Now, we mentioned that payroll can be outsourced, no? And a lot of companies, class, or organizations, in their effort to reduce costs, they outsource their payroll and HRM functions to payroll service bureaus and professional employer organizations. A payroll service bureau maintains the payroll master data for each of its clients and processes payroll for them. A professional employer organization not only processes payroll but also provides HRM services such as employee benefit design and administration. And payroll is one of the most common functions that are being outsourced. It's because it's repetitive, it's routinary, and at the same time, companies wanted to put salary information or salary data outside of the company's premises to avoid of possible leakage. So the only ones that may actually have knowledge about your salary will be the HRM department, but the computation later on and everything will be outsourced to a third party provider or a third party company. So what are the advantages of payroll outsourcing? Obviously, it's reduction of cost. It's wider range of benefits. It's because an expert will handle it and they have more expertise than you, and you're freeing up your computer resources. It's because payroll is really heavy considering that it's routinary, it's regular, it's expected, and it's done twice a month. So the data alone would be heavy, right? So this is the end of our 8th chapter on HRM and payroll cycle. For questions or clarifications, you can find me at Shalomiel Abapo on Twitter, and you can send me an email, shalomiel.abapo@davolawyer.ph.